Welcome. I'm Patrick O'Bannon. I'm president of the Islesboro Historical Society, as unfortunately most of you know by now. Welcome to our second evening with Island Elders. We did this last summer, and it was loads of fun, and it was so much fun that we decided to do it again. I have the obligatory announcements before we get started. This will probably last about an hour, hour and a half. It's hot up here, and you know, I don't really want to subject everybody to the lights for hours and hours. First of all, thanks to Mike Hutcherson and Pam Larson for taking care of the video and the audio tonight. We will be posting the video on the Islesboro Historical Society website and our YouTube channel. And please don't start texting me tomorrow morning at 7 asking where it is. It'll get there as soon as it gets there. I'd like to thank the Islesboro Historical Society Board Chair Setup Committee for their sterling work. And Amanda O'Bannon, John Mitchell, and Sue Hatch for working up the questions last year that we're using again because these people are elders and the questions should be relevant from one year to another. So what we're going to do tonight is we came up with a series of questions that we have posed to all these folks up here. We thought it would be really, really unfair to just sort of, you know, deal with them as if it was an interview on live television or something like that. So we've fed them the questions ahead of time. And I'm going to ask the questions and we'll let people kick it around and pass things back and forth, and if it works like last year, there'll be some great stories told. So let me introduce folks here on my right, your left. Is that right? No, it's your right. It's your right too. Apple Bartlett is a lifelong summer resident of Islesboro. She's the owner of Apples. She's the daughter of Harry and Sister Parrish, and has been coming here most of her, not all of her life. Next to Apple is John Mitchell, who is standing in for Buddy Bethune, who was scheduled to be here tonight and couldn't make it. He's now at Boardman Cottage. Both Buddy and John have very similar backstories, and so John is a great replacement for Buddy. Born on the island.
We'll see.
His parents worked for the Aldrich family for many decades, and he's probably the preeminent island historian. Next to John is Francie Train, who is a lifelong summer resident. Her mother, Frances Drexel Paul Fell, who was then the wife of A.J. Antello Devereaux, built the Devereaux Cottage on West Shore Drive in 1916, 1917. So we have the daughter of one of the cottage builders with us today. And at the end is the youngster in the group, Doug Welldon, who is a VZ on his mother's side and spent summers coming up in the family home, which was built by his great-grandfather, where he now lives year-round. He is from a long, long line of sea captains stretching back 6 or 7 generations, do you know?
6.
I think I 6, and I thought maybe we could squeeze in a 7th, but a long time on the island. So I'm going to start this off and toss out the first question, and whoever would like to answer can jump in. And the first question has to do with when you were young, what did your parents expect you to do during the day? Who would like to start? Francie, go ahead.
First thing my family said to me was, don't forget to wear your never sink. That's what we call flotation devices and all that long-winded stuff. But anyway, and I was told later that a visitor to my family's house said, your little daughter is the first person I ever knew to wear her life jacket to breakfast.
And so you must have spent a lot of time on the water.
Yes, of course. Every available.
Who else? What were other people? Apple?
Well, I will like to say that we were supposed to learn things like tennis and like sailing even if you didn't want to, that was what you did in the summer. So, and also you always had to look presentable. So I want to tell you one story about the tennis the clinics were run by Mr. Ellis Klingeman. And he was a very fatherly, I have to say rather boring man. And his wife's name, I can't remember what her name was.
Mrs. Klingham.
Mrs. Klingeman. But Mr. Klingeman would give us, at the end of every clinic, he would say, now, if you're going out, in the evening or something, and you don't feel safe, you should always bring a quarter with you, because then you could find a telephone booth, which don't exist, and you could call me. You could call me and Mrs. Klingeman, and we would come and rescue you.
But telephone booths were less than a quarter, weren't they?
I don't remember.
Maybe he was making change off of this.
But then sailing, Mrs. Watson Blair had a son. Was she Watson Blair? A son named Watson, and he was one of the most difficult young men I have. And as he grew older, he mellowed, but he was always quite difficult. And he was bored, and my mother said, "My children have to learn how to sail." So Mrs. Blair said, "Well, why don't we get Watson to teach them how to sail?" And for that reason, I do not go on a boat. That's my.
Add to that.
Go ahead, pick up the mic.
Watson Blair was my next-door neighbor down at the Devereaux. Next-door neighbor. And we didn't know that we were different sexes, I don't think. But once my mother called me up to the house and said, "Francis, you're really much too old to wrestle with Watson Blair on the lawn in front of the guests."
John?
Okay, it's a little unfair here. I don't see and recognize one of you, even my wife and daughter. And you can see me. We're targets, aren't we? I guess.
Yes.
Anyway, let's don't talk about that. Okay, my dad used to have a saying that I think many of his contemporaries did as well, about someone that he thought was just top-rated, best person he could think of. And the saying was called salt of the earth. How many of you are old enough to remember that statement? Salt of the earth. Well, I've never used it much at all in my life, but I will use it this evening to describe Buddy Bethune. How many here, just give me an idea, is there anyone here who doesn't know Buddy Bethune? Not too many. Okay, that would be expected. We all know him. So I'm going to avoid the first question a little bit, Patrick, and speak a bit about Buddy, because Buddy and I have been friends for, I think, 75 or 76 years. Long time, all the way to junior high school. He went to the Middle Guinea School, and I went to the Dark Harbor School Sewing Circle without knowing that was what it was going to come to. And I didn't learn anything about sewing either from that. Anyway, here's just a very short message that I wanted to convey to you about Buddy, who is just as good a friend today as he was when we were in junior high school. Buddy's dad, Eldridge Bethune, which is Buddy's name too, came from Nova Scotia as a caretaker at the Bonnet Farm, which at that time was owned by Charlie Pierce. And after working a while and seeing the job fit for him, he sent for his wife to come join them at the farm. And all 4 children, Eldridge, Juanita, Stanley, and Kenneth, were born here on the island. Unfortunately, Buddy is the oldest of the 4, and the other 3 are no longer with us. Buddy went to high school and was classmates of my sister, Ruth Hartley, and I think Marilyn Pendleton as well, in the class of 1949. And after high school, the family moved to New Hampshire. Upon his retirement from work in New Hampshire, Buddy was a builder and carpenter. Buddy and his wife moved back to Islesboro, and that was probably more than 20 years ago. One great example of the many things Buddy has done for our community, and we could name a great many from the Historical Society, certainly, but one of the most notable things I can think of that he did was that he built all the quilt racks. And the quilt racks were used for many years when we used to have quilt shows here, and they now rest with the library in Dark Harbor. So Buddy is much appreciated for his many unselfish island accomplishments. And I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Doug?
One thing to add about Buddy is he stopped me when I was out mowing the grass a few years ago and came over, and he had a framed wood carving of a sailing ship. It's now in our museum upstairs. I think it was done by his brother, maybe. And it's a beautiful thing. And when you get a chance to go to the museum at some point, look at that. That came to us at the Historical Society by way of Buddy Bethune, who just was driving by and decided to give it to me to bring down here. As far as I could tell, he didn't know what to do with it, but it's a great thing. What did your parents expect you to do during the day? They actually expected me to cut the grass and bring in the wood. And I can tell you the old Glenwood stove that heated a good part of the house, even in the summertime, because it was colder then, I was pretty happy to see that go at one point, so I didn't have to keep bringing in the wood. We did a certain amount of boating. Francie was talking some about that, and we had an old leaky skiff that we were able to fix up a little bit, and my mother, even though her grandfather was a sea captain, was terrified of me going out on this skiff with a 5-horse Johnson that my Jensen outboard that my uncle was arranged for me. And we put that on there, and we actually got letters and put on the front of the skiff the Doug out. It was a bad pun, but I couldn't quite bring myself to say I'm going in the dugout, but that's what we decided to call it. And one day we were out, I had a buddy with me, my buddy Scotty, and we were just cruising around out near the red bell buoy here. And lo and behold, the Governor Muskie comes by. And I don't know who remembers, I guess a lot of people remember that. But it kicked up a wake that was bigger than anything I'd ever seen when I was down in the skiff. And that thing swamped the boat. And we had to motor as best we could over to Spruce Island, right across from the ferry dock there, and get the water out of it and then dry ourselves out. Meanwhile, I noticed this lobster boat driving around the harbor, and my scared-to-death mother had commandeered the lobster boat. It was out there looking amongst all the islands for us. And I told Scotty, I said, we need to start this motor and get back to the dock. So that was just one story there. One other thing we had was a rather unique, I guess maybe this was something done for the time, but we had a swing in the barn, and we still do have a swing in the barn. We could open up the big barn door and swing on it, my sister and I. And I've threatened to try that out lately, but my wife, Norma Jean, says, don't you dare. She's a little scared there might be dry rot in the ropes of that thing. I don't know.
She's taking over your mom's role.
Yes, she is.
Looking out for you.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
So the second question we had to do with the presence of the telephone on the island and what your recollections are of your family's use of the telephone. And most of us who've worked on historical studies here on the island have realized that up until the mid-1960s, Islesboro had a switchboard and party lines. and the tales are rife of picking up the phone and talking to Mrs. Philbrick and saying you wanted to get a hold of your mother or your father, and she knowing where they were. That she knew all and saw all. So one of the things that we thought was very interesting was about what your recollections were of the use of the telephone. Apple, you came prepared. You have.
I found this actually near the telephone, but I remember calling Mrs. Philbrick, right, and saying, "Where's my mummy?" And she knew exactly which cocktail party she was at. So that was so then I found this by the telephone. Came out when how to use Dark Harbor dial telephones, and it's hysterical. I'll just read a couple of funny things. It says, first, look up a telephone number. Dial service necessitates changing all numbers here. Below. A new telephone number, that's boring. Lift the telephone and listen for dial tone. This is the steady hum that tells you the central office equipment is ready to receive your call. It's the dial telephone's way of saying, number please. Remember, never dial until you hear the dial tone. Third, this is I thought was funny. Start to dial. The number you want is 734-2211. However, as this is a local call within the Dark Harbor Exchange, simply dial the last 5 numerals in the call number. Remember that? Yeah, 42211 to complete your call. Put your finger in the opening associated with the number 4. Telephone is kept off, of course. And turn the dial around to the right as far as you can. Then lift your finger and let the dial turn back without touching it.
So we could hand this out to kids now who have no idea how to use a rotary phone.
If you hurry the return of the dial, you may get a wrong number. Okay, well, it goes on and on. It's very funny. So that's what I remember.
Who's next with telephones? John, Francie? Use the mic, John. John, use the mic.
I don't think I'm deliberately avoiding the question, but it's. I'll get into the telephone in just a minute. Okay, because we do have one.
I've lost control already.
We do have a telephone. Incidentally, when you get up to the Historical Society's second floor, you will see an old telephone that was used in a telephone station. And you'll also see a picture of Charles Philbrick, who he and his wife Alice Philbrick were the first persons that I remember that ran the office. And Charles had a little black dog, and the dog's name was Dial. And that was quite forward-reaching because we didn't have any dial at that time. So maybe that prompted some interest, I don't know, but it happened anyway. Okay, another thing that I wanted to mention, just involving Buddy a little bit, I hadn't anyway, thought much about this at all earlier, but the Bethune and Mitchell family had really a parallel history growing up. Both of our families lived in the caretaker's cottage on the estate of a wealthy person that was caretaken by our father. There were 4 siblings in each group. Opportunity to work at the estate, and we all did that. Or outside, we did that too. So the golf course, caddying, and expectations and rewards from the employer were just great. I have mentioned before what a wonderful employer the Aldrich family was, and I'm sure Buddy felt the same thing about his employer as well. So we didn't use the telephone excessively because it belonged to the estate. On the Aldrich estate, there was a 3-trunk line switchboard. And when I worked there as houseman, this is a nice way of saying butler's assistant, dishwasher, fireplace layer, you name it, cleaning the picnic equipment and everything. But we had 3 numbers that came in on the switchboard, 155, 156, or 157. And when it came into the switchboard, it was delivered to the right number and presumably the right person too. So that was quite novel. We didn't, we had good use of it. We didn't overuse it, but it was a different thing. I thought that's the way it was going to be, but as we know, dial one out. Okay.
Francie? Just, yeah.
I'm the same vintage, a little bit older, but we had 3 phone extensions in the house: the pantry, my mother's bedroom, and the operating section was what we called, nowadays it's the coat room. We called it, believe it or not, the cloak room. That's my vintage. So there was a box on the wall. I had to stand on another chair to reach it. And you reached up to the side of the box and cranked the little handle. The nice big ring. And you say, "I'd like to speak to Liberty, please." "Oh, yeah, she ain't at the Aldrich's this morning. She's over to Leonard's playing. So I'll ring the Leonards for you." And that's the way the phone worked in those cozy days.
So when you picked up the phone, you had to dial, you had to crank
You had to
it
call
to get
the operator by dialing.
Right. So you didn't just pick it up and start talking. You had to let them know you were there. Doug?
Yeah, actually, you talked about Mrs. Philbrick. Her ghost may be haunting Marilyn Pendleton's house down there. That's where the exchange was. When we had the party line in, it had the big box that Francie was talking about and the crank, and everybody had a set number of rings. We were 5, so when the phone started to ring, you had to listen for 5 rings. And hopefully somebody cranked hard enough that you didn't get a you needed a really robust ring. And because it was a party line, sometimes it got softer when you picked it up because people were listening in on your on your conversation. A couple of the culprits were the Conway sisters, who I think were just summer residents. They lived in a big 2-story house, which was basically at the front of where John Gorham lives, right off the road there. They were 2 rings. Elizabeth Ladd across the street was 3. I think the Lilies were 14 or 13, which, no, actually that was 1 long ring and 4 short for 14. But you had to make sure that it wasn't 5, which would have been us. But with a party line, I remember my mother getting on the phone and trying to make a call, and she couldn't hear what she was talking to, whoever she was talking to, especially if it was long distance. So she'd say, "Okay, get off the line." And the Conway sisters would hang up. And then she'd say, "You too, Helene." And that was Helene Sutherland, who lived up where Debbie Trasco lives right now. So there were certain things you had to get used to with that phone. I know it was loud. It was in the middle of the house. You could hear it everywhere, provided there weren't, weaklings dialing.
So if you were a 2-digit, if you were 12 rings or 14 rings, you got a long buzz and then short ones.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. There were several people on there.
And then you had to go through Mrs. Philbrick for anything that was long distance, obviously.
Yeah, when you did, you called.
Well, you had
Mrs.
to go
Philbrick.
through her for everything, right?
Yeah, you had to. Oh, and by the way, at one point, that darn Glenwood stove in the kitchen, the stovepipe caught fire and it went off with a roar. And so we called actually Mrs. Philbrick and said, "There's a fire here. Get the fire department." So she did. Pearl Fairfield was the fire chief then, and he showed up. So did about 40 cars on the island. They'd all come to watch the place burn down, but they helped. You know, they were there. That's how it worked.
Who needs Facebook? You know?
Exactly.
Sure, John, use the mic.
Something I forgot to mention earlier. In 1957, I was in the Army and stationed in the South Pacific on a little island. And we had seldom opportunities to communicate home. But on one occasion, we did, and we had to stand in line and talk for 3 minutes only. So I put the call in to my parents, and there was no answer. So Mrs. Philbrick, Alice Philbrick, cut in and said, "I'll find them." And she called around town while I waited, and I guess everybody else did, and finally found them. That's something quite personal that you don't see anymore. So the listening in might have been a downside, but the finding the people was a good upside.
That's great. So all of you were you were either here year-round, in John's case, or you were here for the length of the summer. Would you go off-island? How did you go off-island? What would you do if you went off-island? Or were you just happy to be here for the entire summer?
I want to go first. We never went off the island.
All right, let's see. The next question. Anybody else, or are we done?
Okay. My answer is, how often did you go off island? Quick answer, never.
I'm sensing a trend here.
My Cadwallader cousins had more influence than I did with their family. And they made me furious with jealousy when they came back one day and said they'd gone all the way to Belfast in a speedboat, and they had stopped at an emporium, I figured it was, called Perry's Nut House. I was consumed with jealousy.
Yeah,
Anything?
Perry's Nut House has a lot more weird things then than it does now inside of there, by the way. So we take the ferry every now and then and go to the mainland and shop at the First National. And also there was a train station where they would unload, I think through Swift and Company, meats. And I always heard in my house, you can't get good meat in Maine. So they get it from Swift and Company there in Rockland. The other thing was the hippocampus ran when I was a kid. That was the mailboat from Warren's Landing, AKA Joint Point. And we'd go over. As a matter of fact, generally my grandmother would take me over on the hippocampus to Belfast to buy shoes, like once a summer or something. And I'll tell you, you got off the boat there at the foot of the street, and that hill going up to the Colburn shoe store looked like it was a mile long when you're about this tall. And we'd walk up there and we'd get shoes, and we'd go back on the hippocampus and did that.
But so you wore shoes during the summer? I mean, I assumed everybody just went barefoot, all summer long.
I had a fear of stepping on up-island spiders, so I always wore the shoes.
So what was the thing you most loved to do on the island when you were young, and how does that affect you nowadays? I mean, was there something that you just adored doing when you were younger that still resonates with you today? Sure, go ahead.
Well, one thing I did like then, I like now, is I'd love to go to the beach and pick up different things on the beach and do stuff with them, like make funny presents. Anyway, dogs' names with crab shells or whatever. But anyway, using my imagination on the beach. But the thing I most really loved and still love is the dog show. And I started the dog show when I was 10 years old, and I'm 89 now, so it's a continuous. We didn't have it during the war and one year when there was that parvo sickness for dogs. But it was so much fun, and Phyllis and Fiona Field, and they had this wonderful man, Haslam, and a wonderful woman named Kuzi. And Hazzy put up the ring. He got metal stakes and made a ring and put the rope in. We still have the same stakes, new rope. And Kuzi would make the ribbons. So now we still have the dog show. We still make the ribbons. There's nothing. One summer, one fancy person said, "We'll do the dog show," and they had ribbons bought. They bought ribbons, and it was not a success. But the dog show really means a lot to me, and I like giving the money to the. I, several years gave it to the community center to give. To pay for rabies shots on the island. And now and Save the Children. That was the first thing we gave it to, Save the Children. So that's still going on now. And what's the matter with this?
Yes, sir.
Is there? It sounds different. So that's what I loved then and love now.
Who else?
Okay.
Use the mic, John.
Yes. Some of you know, probably most of you don't know where I grew up. I grew up in Dark Harbor on the Aldrich Estate. And we had a gorgeous cove in front of us that looked out toward the yacht club and Ames Cove. And we had the bulk of our greatest times, I think, were held both summer and winter on this cove. In the summer, the tide went all the way out, so the mudflats were baked by the sun, and when the tide came in, it was warm. So we did a lot of swimming, a lot of fishing. There used to be a big 7-tiered pier in front of the Pratt Cottage, which is now no longer there. And we'd go out and fish for flounders and get more than we needed, and then spend the rest of the day cleaning them out. And we also had several points that we would swim to. We had a big rock, which is still there, I believe. Nobody's big enough to move it. And then we had one a long distance away, which we called appropriately the Long Journey Rock. So the times we had that were spent right there in Dark Harbor were the preeminent ones that we had. We did other things, of course, but that stays in my mind right to this day.
Nice.
Very nice. Do you have anything, Francie?
The thing I loved to do then and now most was fishing. And I loved flounder fishing. I knew the technique backwards and forwards. Nice little wooden holder with the twine wrapped around it. And you let the sinker down just so till it touches the bottom, pull it up 6 inches, and wait till the nibble. We loved flounder fishing. And at that time, my family had an Irish cook. And she said, "Miss Frances, you bring me another one of them damn fish, I'm going home to Philadelphia." But we cleaned our own fish. It was a rule.
I guess it's my turn now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I always liked exploring the shore, and especially we seemed to go to Spriggs Beach more than Big Tree Beach, which at the time was really called Ash Tree Beach because of the ash tree that was across the street from it there. And there's actually a cave as you walk out towards Turtle Head from Spriggs Beach. You can go in there and look around. It's not a big cave, but that's fun, and I like going to Hutchins Island. As a matter of fact, I always thought the beach down there before you go on the sandbar, sort of a magical place because of all the changes that happened there. It used to be a very grown-up area. You had to walk through, it was like a grass road all grown up, and a house there all behind all the weeds and everything, and you'd eventually be able to go down to the beach. And I always thought that was a special place. I liked going to Drift Inn when that was open with the Creelmans, because they had cheeseburgers, a ping pong table, and a jukebox, so I liked that. That was fun. Pat Boone, all right, I was there, put the money in to hear that. And most of all, and I like going across the street to Elizabeth Ladd. She had a farm, all kinds of animals and chickens and everything else, and helping out over there, which next month you may hear more about. Shameless plug alert in there. So
Well done.
That
Well
was
done.
fun. Thank you.
So did you, I mean, there were a number of places where one could get food on the island at different points in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. Did people go to those very often, or was it sort of a special occasion to go get a burger at the Drift Inn?
Well, they had, I think, a pretty regular bunch. They had ice cream, too. You know, you could go down there. The menu wasn't extensive, but believe me, hamburgers, cheeseburgers, they were right there. It was great. Ralph Trim and his wife, Violet, had a place. It was a mobile gas station. It's the building right across from Mert Durkee's and George Durkee's place there with the awning that comes out. And they did pretty much the same thing without the jukebox or the ping pong table. they did that. And then there was the Island Cafe. Stella McCorrison ran that right across from the community center, and part of it's still there. There was a wing off of it, and now it's there. It's not looking real good, and the paint's coming off the outside. And
That was a
Yeah.
tourist trap. Was that the tourist trap?
I don't know if it was ever the tourist trap. I don't know. Might have been.
No, that much later.
Yeah, and there was like Stoberg's Diner. That was later. And there was a place right on the end of the pier. This goes back to when the Governor Brand was running, maybe the Muskie, where there were hamburgers and stuff cooked there before you went down to the floats. And I'd be out there on the boat, and sometimes, usually, with my uncle there, and we'd be going up and down Gilkey Harbor, and he'd say, "I can smell the hamburgers from here." And we'd go back and get the burgers there on the dock.
Okay.
Quite a few places.
yeah.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
I have written bad notes here. I think this story would be applicable now. And get ready, folks. Okay?
Fasten your seatbelts.
We used to love to go to Ranlett's, Evan Ranlett's, and they had a jukebox and a pinball machine. And that was I think we did that very regularly. But that makes me think of this story about my mother. She, one evening, I was grown up, so I knew what this was all about. It's not when I was a little kid. But she said to everybody, I think my aunts were there and maybe my kids and various people, and she said, "Tell me, what is a condom?" I thought this was worth telling. So I'm not going to tell you, because I know you all know what a condom is, but my mother did not. And so she asked different people around the table. No one would tell her what a condom was in the beginning. Then finally somebody did tell her what it was. So the next day she went, can you hear me? The next day she went down to Billy Warren's, to Ranlett's, and she said, looking around at the things he had to say, "Oh my God, Billy, you have condoms." And she was looking at the balloons for birthday parties.
It was a more innocent time.
That's such a great story. John, grab the mic.
I have been going to the Dark Harbor shop for quite a few years, and probably most of you have too. Maybe not quite as long as me. But the Dark Harbor shop only has been in existence for 50 years. Before that, it was run by the Eben and Roberta Ranlett, for quite a few number of years with essentially the same furniture, the same ice cream bar, and maybe the same, not the same, but similar ice cream. It was a good experience. Before that, it was operated by Eben Jr.'s father, Eben Randlett, who we call Shin Randlett. How many people remember Shin Randlett? I'd be surprised if anybody does. Okay, gotcha. Well, on one occasion, I was there enjoying an ice cream a long time ago. And this courtly gentleman dressed up in a white suit and necktie and I think a straw hat came in with his grandchildren to buy them ice cream. And they came out and sat around for a while and went home. And at that time, I didn't know who Charles Dana Gibson was. That was quite a while ago, too.
What's great is there's old photos of the shop when Randlett ran it, and the sign above says E.M. Randlett, and on one side it says ice cream and confections, and on the other side it says cigarettes and tobacco.
Yeah, it does. I think Eben Randlett delivered milk. I believe it was Eben who did that. He was the milkman. And it was from Grant's Dairy, and you actually got it like on the porch, and then you put out the other bottles to go back.
When I was a kid, our house was a goodly walk to the village, and every day when I was released from summer reading or something, I'd walk up to Randlett's and get my cone. It was a ritual. And like today with dear Bill, you met everybody you ever wanted to know on that porch.
So everybody had childhood friends here, and I'd love to hear just some stories about your experiences with one or more of your childhood friends here on the island. So take it away. Go ahead, John. Use the mic.
My childhood friends were usually, to think of a word to describe it, compartmentalized because of where we lived, and transportation wasn't as good in those days as it is today, certainly. So my closest friends that I grew up with were those who lived in the colony, if you know where the colony is. It would be Jerry Pendleton, whom we recently lost about a month ago, Duffer Pendleton, who everybody knew, I think, and Mert Leach, Eben Babbage, and we did a lot of things together. We used to go up to Drift Inn, which was built, I think, in 1938 by Fred Dodge and his wife Doris Dodge, and it was called the Rainbow Inn at that time. And then later on, it was called the Bucket of Blood, and there was a reason for that name. There was quite an altercation up there, and there was some blood strewn around. So there were dances, of course, the town orchestra. We used to, when my mother played the piano at the yacht club, we could listen across Ames Cove and hear all the music and all the talk and everything. So it was not an unusual experience to participate by listening to all that music, and that's probably how my sister Ruth got started with her musical knowledge and competence. Community hall activities, there were a great many. They were, I'll just mention one, the Fireman's Ball, which occurred every year, and that was quite an event too, that brought everybody in. I have an old community hall sign, which I thought I would hold up, but I thought that would be a little tacky. So a lot of things going on, not as many opportunities, to have a meal, perhaps, but a very good time, and a very especially good time for friends to get together, and that's what we did.
Were you on foot, or did you have bicycles?
Well, that's another question. Usually, one of our dads would take us where we wanted to go, and that way they could decide on when we should come home too. So, that was all planned out. But we did a lot of. We used to swim in in the Dark Harbor Cove with all the, the bathing houses and the floats out front. But we also swam in the gullies, which is called. If you look toward the north, you'll see a gully going in and turning. And this was, fortunately, this was there, and we used it before the tennis courts were built. And it was a good thing because we didn't wear any bathing suits when we swam in there. So there were no arrests that I know of.
Okay, now I seem to be sort of the rather dirty-minded person on the.
I'm shocked.
You are. All my friends, we used to play capture the flag at the golf course, across the road, and we loved swimming in the Dark Harbor pool, and the dances at the ballroom, and but here's my story. We used to play sardines, and there were two different places we played sardines. One was, I think you call it the Drexel house, I'm not sure, Travolta's house, which we thought was a whore house because it had a long hallway with rooms on each side. We were young. And then the other place we used to play sardines was the Mitchell house, which was Kirsty's house, and now the somebody's. This is a hearsay story, okay? This is hearsay. It was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell from Philadelphia, and Mr. Mitchell had a girlfriend, and she was a trapeze artist in the circus, and she was called Pinky Toes. Well, Pinky Toes, unfortunately, was murdered, and no one knew exactly who murdered her. But Francie might know.
You're talking about Mrs. Drexel.
You might have heard that story, Francie.
You have to pick up the mic, Francie. Everyone wants to hear.
You don't remember Pinky Toes?
Say again?
You don't remember Pinky Toes, Mr. Mitchell's girlfriend?
No, I thought you were talking about a weird little lady called Aunt Mary Drexel.
Oh, no, she was up at the whorehouse.
Once I told my mother kissing Aunt Mary, which was obligatory, was like kissing a marshmallow. All powder and soft.
So the Drexel Cottage has long hallways with lots of little rooms off of them that were originally intended for the servants. So the story, I can see where the story comes from.
Thank you.
But it wasn't. Anybody else with childhood friends?
I can't top any of that.
I know, yeah, it's like...
I'll remain silent at this point.
So, other than playing sardines in whorehouses, when you and your family got together, what did you guys do? Did you? I know John's family played music. Were there board games? Did you tell stories? What sort of activities did you engage in, with your family when you were young?
I wonder if anybody remembers the baseball games that the summer people actually played with the regular Islesboro folk.
And where was the field?
It was where it is now, right next to the pond there.
Yeah, but Hughes Point Road, right?
And my brother George had many island friends, but the girls didn't somehow mingle. Wasn't this on?
Yeah. So, was there a baseball field across the road here, too?
There were three baseball fields historically on Islesboro. The first one was the one directly across. If you crossed the road, that was a baseball field. That's where I played when I was in high school. And then after that, the one down at Hughes Point came up, and that took several different configurations, not the same as it is today. And then for a time, we had a town team which composed of some of the summer residents and some of the island residents. And that was down, if you, how do I say it without, if you know where the road to George Lewis was, you'd know, Francie would know.
And you know what we called him?
I don't know. Turning up that road, it was right in the corner there, and we were helped to build the field by telephone company workers. So for several years, that was the best field of all, actually. So as far as I know, there were 3 fields on the island.
But Mr. Lewis was known a little bit on the quiet as dirty old one-egg Lewis, because his crew said he was so cheap he only gave them 1 egg each for breakfast.
He didn't talk to his wife, did he? Didn't they sit across? Was that a different family? The husband would sit at one end of the table and the wife at the other end of the table, and they didn't speak to each other? You don't remember that? Story.
I'll hear it later.
So John, your family played music a lot. I mean,
We did
Use
give me
your-
a minute on that, I guess, although I seem to be monopolized. In the wintertime, we at our house had a musical evening just about every Saturday night. And all the relatives would come in and other people, musicians, and Mother would sit at the piano and play all the old songs, the ragtime songs, the old jazz songs, and the ones that was current of the day. And we'd sit around and sing. Usually somebody else would, my uncle, Gerald, would usually play his violin, and it was a wonderful, wonderful evening
great.
that we had. And my other uncle, Ray Wardwell, was not musically inclined, and he would sit in the kitchen and entertain anybody who wanted to listen to him hunting stories about in Western Maine. But it was there were evenings there that I shall never forget. They're just firm in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some musical interludes too. We had one of I forget the brand name, but it was a great big upright piano. And underneath there was a drawer that you could pull, and it flopped open, and there was all kinds of old sheet music in there. And I played the piano, my sister played, my mother played the piano, and sometimes we did duets on the piano. And then every now and then my Aunt Lydia would show up. She had a great singing voice. She had been in the church choir, a lot of things like that. And then we'd sit around and sing this old war horse thing. We'd sing this old song called The Fog Bell, which I've briefed Amanda O'Bannon on quite recently. But anyway, we had a good time with that. One other thing that we'd do, there used to be clam bakes around the island, and Sprague's Beach was a place where there was a clam bake. It was a big one. They'd have it a few times every summer. And if you're going north on Meadow Pond Road and you're coming down to the beach, on the left, there's a bluff there, and it's right off the road, and there's a residence there now. But that's where they'd set up all the chairs and everything else. And golly, a lot of, well, of course, I was a lot younger, looked like a lot of little old ladies with fancy hats. They'd turn up, and they'd be there, and they'd cook the clams right down on the beach. And if you look below that bluff right there, there's a succession of ledges, very smooth, where you could actually set the big fire, put the clams, the lobster, the corn on the cob, hot dogs too, and then cover it with seaweed and everything else, and you'd have a great clam bake. And they were well attended. They were, a big event on the weekends.
Who sponsored them? Was it just a community event?
I don't know. I know my grandfather did a lot of clam bakes. I'm not sure he did those, though.
I want to just add about the clam bakes. There's a lot more singing in those days than there is now, because everybody's electronically damaged. And the one person who had the best voice was Lucy Aldrich. and she had a beautiful alto voice. And her favorite song was slightly ribald, I think.
Here we go again.
Sing it.
So, sing it. I was going to go somewhere. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask. So there were a lot of people who played music on the island at the places like the Drift Inn and stuff like that. Did you get local musicians who would play, or would they bring in a band, or was it just local people who would come in and play?
I thought occasionally they were from the mainland, you know. But there was a beautiful dance floor in Drift Inn. It was just perfect, you know. And that went, but yeah. I can tell one other music story. Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, somehow I got roped into playing. There actually was an electric organ at the Second Baptist Church for a while there, and I got roped into being the organist for the Sunday services one summer. And this was okay because I'm trying to think who the preacher was at that point. But anyway, he would give me the list of hymns, and I'd pick out a prelude and a postlude, and away we'd go, you know, doxology, knew that by heart, you know, the whole thing. And then one Sunday, he ad-libs and picks out a hymn I hadn't practiced. And I flip over the hymnal, it's got like 85 sharps and 25 flats, and I'm like, how am I going to do this? And I played it very slowly. We mangled our way through that.
I remember Lucy's song, "You Get No Bread with One Meatball." The waiter yelled up down the hall, "No, you get no bread with one meatball."
By the way, there's an old organ at the Free Will Baptist Church up Island that plays rolls of music in addition to the keyboard there, and it's hooked up to a vacuum cleaner, and you turn that on. It's supposed to play. I want to see if it'll do it, because it actually played like things like Wagner, Lohengrin, and stuff like that. It's like, whoa. You know.
Wow.
That was donated by the Drexel family to that church. It came from the Drexel house.
So was there a historical event that affected your family, and if so, how? And you know, we're now coming out, knock on wood, from the pandemic. I mean, do you remember your parents talking about the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918? I know there were a handful of people who died on the island of influenza. And of course, the war, World War II, had a huge effect on the island with rationing and making it much more difficult for summer residents to get up here. But you know, what historical events spring to your mind, other than allowing cars onto the island, I guess?
I would not be here without the awful epidemic of the flu of 1918, because my father's young wife died of the influenza, and he had gone over to New York City to meet. He was coming in on a troop ship, and she had gone over to meet him, and she died that night, and he never saw her again. And then my mother and my father, that same father, met a few years later and got married, and look what happened.
Okay, historical events affecting families, check. Okay, who wants to top that? Go ahead.
We're still on historical?
We're still on historical events,
Okay.
John.
Yes, this one that occurred in my own family. In 1918, my maternal grandmother died from the flu epidemic. As far as I know, she's the only person that I know about who we lost on Islesboro during the flu epidemic. If there were others, it didn't come to my knowledge. Her name was Delia Carroll, and my middle name is Carroll.
This is kind of a vague recollection of a couple of things, but before there was a polio vaccine, there was some sort of, I don't know if this was like fake news or what it was, but there was something about wet hay being possibly an incubator for catching polio. So, we'd have the field cut, and then we weren't allowed out if it rained, to go after the days after to go anywhere near the wet hay. And then sort of the same thing. I know this is kind of like, it's like, what did we think of these things back in the day? But there used to be such a thing as atmospheric testing of hydrogen bombs and stuff. And so there were days we couldn't go out and play until that was all done. You'd keep track of it in the news. Yeah, I don't know if my folks were just overly protective or not. I tend to think they probably were, but that was something that, I have a vague recollection of, from there. That was happy, wasn't it?
Well, I'd like to get to our last question here, which was last year was really inspiring, and I don't know, maybe it'll just be dirty tonight. Who knows? What would you like to tell younger people about Islesboro? Go ahead.
Okay, I want to read this. This has been hanging in the pantry for years and years. If once you have slept on an island, you'll never be quite the same. You may look as you looked the day before and go by the same old name. You may bustle about in street and shop. You may sit at home and sew, but you'll never see blue water and wheeling gulls wherever you may go. You may chat with the neighbors of this and that, and close to your fire keep, but you'll hear ship whistles and lighthouse bells and tides beat through your sleep. Oh, you won't know why, and you can't say how such change upon you came, but once you have slept on an island, you'll never be quite the same. By Rachel Field.
Well, if
Go
you
ahead,
don't mind,
Francie.
I'll just read this last paragraph. What's happened to the endless summers of our youth? Today, summer jobs are sought for everyone over 14, greatly curtailed vacations for all the working mothers and fathers, soccer camp, hockey camp, foreign language camp, summer school, and educational trips abroad take up most of the holidays. Leisure has been replaced by compulsive activity. Admitting to doing nothing incurs a monumental guilt trip. But happily for me, nearly 97 years later, and still summering just recently in our old family house, that the same quarrelsome seagulls, the same enduring rocks, stony beaches, green blue sea, the fog and the sun, and the splash of salt. Best of all, many of my original friends, now with their own children and grandchildren, return to this place, the well-loved Islesboro Island of our childhood, which we visit year after year like migrating seabirds, always coming home.
The question is, what would you like to tell younger people about Islesboro? It's funny, your perspective changes over the years. When I was young, the summers did indeed seem endless. They were just magical. And then as I went off to find fame and fortune elsewhere and have a family, I told my son, I think when he was an adolescent, he was asking me about Islesboro because he loved it here and still does. And he said, maybe I could live on Islesboro all the time. And at the time, this goes back a long time now, 30 years at least, I told him, I said, and with apologies to my Islander friends, I said, Islesboro is a good place to be from and go to. And that was my perspective then. Now the years change, and so does the island in many, many ways. And right now, I would tell young people, this is a great place to make your future and to raise a family for so many reasons. We're up to date on things, but more than that, there's the intangible, there's the feeling, and there is the magic. So that's my advice to them.
John, do you want to have the last word here? Use your mic.
Yes. I think that people have changed more than Islesboro has changed. Of course, we've all witnessed many changes here. One of the most disturbing things to me about people, and it includes me, is that there's not nearly as much conversation. There's not nearly as much personal interaction. We can argue that the situation we're in is the reason. We can make other arguments, but the same basic principles, I think, still are maintained here. You should work hard. You should be as forthright as you can and use whatever you have to communicate better with other people. I think the island, I'm seeing changes that people are coming back to the island when for a long time we didn't get much of interaction or people coming. And people who work from home, for example, the ferry isn't as big an issue as it could be. And there's lots of other things too. So I would like to tell people that the island is a great place, but come here, before you move here, come here and see what we have. See that we have 2 stores, one of which sells gas. See what we have in the summer and see what we have year-round. And if you're uncomfortable with that, probably this isn't the place for you. That's the best advice I could give to someone, a young person or an older person.
I think with that, we're at the end of the evening. I want to thank Apple and John and Francie and Doug for a wonderful conversation. Thank all of you for coming out and supporting this event. Yeah, it is warm up here. Tomorrow morning at 9, I'll be at Greenwood Cemetery at the Up Island Church and hope to see some of you there. Keep on top of what we're doing through our Facebook page and through our webpage. Drive safely, and thank you very much for coming. Thanks a lot.